Can happiness truly exist in the absence of what we crave most? This question lingers in the depths of human experience, prompting us to examine the intricate relationship between desire, fulfillment, and self-awareness. We often equate happiness with the fulfillment of our cravings, whether physical, emotional, or psychological. But paradoxically, the very act of chasing pleasure can sometimes leave us feeling empty. So, where does that leave us? Should we relinquish our pursuit of pleasure altogether, detaching from the desire to achieve clarity and purpose? Or is there a way to integrate pleasure into our lives without allowing it to consume us? To unravel this paradox, we must first explore what pleasure truly means and whether its presence is necessary for self-actualization or if restraint offers a deeper sense of fulfillment. The duality of pleasure, a blessing or a distraction. So here's the paradox of pleasure as per Tao. Chasing happiness will never bring it. Forcing growth will never make you whole. Clinging to pleasure will only bring suffering. Instead, let life flow. Let happiness come and go like the breath. Enjoy pleasure, but do not hold it too tightly. Because when we stop grasping, when we stop forcing, that is when we find what we were seeking all along. Pleasure, at its core, is neither good nor bad. It is a fundamental aspect of the human experience, deeply woven into our instincts for survival, connection, and joy. The warmth of the sun on our skin, the laughter shared with a loved one, the satisfaction of accomplishing a goal, these are all forms of pleasure that enrich our existence. However, when pleasure becomes an end rather than a means, when we chase it relentlessly, hoping it will bring lasting happiness, it often eludes us. Overindulgence can lead to diminishing returns, where the more we seek gratification, the less fulfilling it becomes. Why? Because the initial pleasure of acquisition fades, replaced by an insatiable desire for more. The cycle continues, with no lasting satisfaction in sight. This raises an important question. Does true happiness come from external pleasure, or is it something cultivated from within? Self-awareness and the role of pleasure. In many spiritual traditions, self-awareness is considered the key to inner peace. But does attaining a higher state of consciousness require the denial of pleasure? Western thought often sees self-actualization as a climb, a mountain to be conquered. The Tao sees it differently. In Taoism, becoming your true self is not about adding more, but about letting go. It's about returning to your most natural state. The more we force, the more we struggle. The more we surrender, the more we become. A tree does not force itself to grow. A river does not force itself to flow. They simply are. And yet, in that effortless being, they become exactly what they are meant to be. This is where the paradox deepens. Pleasure itself is not the enemy. It's naturally a part of life. Rather, it is our attachment to pleasure or the urge to control that often leads us astray. When we desire something intensely, whether it's wealth, love, status, or even enlightenment, it controls us. The highs feel amazing, but the fear of losing them creeps in. And so we grasp even tighter, afraid that without them, we are nothing. However, when we cultivate mindful enjoyment, relishing moments of pleasure without being consumed by them, we strike a balance that fosters both fulfillment and self-awareness. Consider an artist deeply immersed in their craft. They experience pleasure not from external validation, but from the creative process itself. Their joy comes from presence and engagement, rather than an endless pursuit of more. In contrast, someone who creates solely for external praise may find their happiness fleeting, dependent on external approval rather than intrinsic passion. This distinction is crucial. The key is not to abandon pleasure, but to approach it with intention and awareness, to enjoy it without allowing it to control us. Can self-actualization exist without pleasure? Self-actualization is about becoming the best version of ourselves. But can we truly reach that stage without pleasure? At first, it may seem like self-actualization requires sacrifice, discipline, and even suffering. Athletes train for years. Monks give up worldly comforts, and people dedicated to a higher purpose often delay gratification. Their focus is on long-term fulfillment rather than immediate pleasure. However, even in discipline, there is a kind of joy, pleasure that comes from purpose. A runner experiences a runner's high, A monk finds peace in meditation, and a scientist feels excitement in discovery. This suggests that pleasure is not the enemy of self-actualization. Instead, it is the type of pleasure we pursue that matters. A life without any pleasure can become dull and mechanical, while a life driven only by pleasure can lead to distraction and dissatisfaction. The key is balance, embracing pleasure not as the goal, but as a complement to growth. The role of pleasure in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Psychologist Abraham Maslow outlined 5 levels of human needs. 1. Physiological needs: food, water, sleep, and shelter. 2. Safety needs: security, stability, and protection. 3. Love and belongingness: relationships and emotional connections. 4. Esteem needs: recognition, self-respect, and confidence. 5. Self-actualization: personal growth, creativity, and purpose. Pleasure plays a role at every stage of this hierarchy. At the basic level, we feel pleasure from eating, sleeping, and feeling safe. At the social level, pleasure comes from love and belonging. Even esteem needs to involve fulfillment in accomplishments. Maslow argued that self-actualization happens only when lower needs are met. A person struggling with malnutrition, isolation, or extreme stress may find it difficult to focus on personal growth. However, he also distinguished between deficiency needs, things we lack, like food or social connection, and growth needs, the desire to develop and find meaning. Once basic needs are met, fulfillment shifts from external pleasure to internal satisfaction. This means that while pleasure is essential in the early stages of development, self-actualization does not necessarily require traditional pleasures like indulgence or rewards. Instead, fulfillment at this level comes from meaningful engagement in life itself. The subjectivity of needs and self-actualization. While Maslow's hierarchy suggests a step-by-step progression, real life is more complex. Some people achieve self-actualization despite lacking basic needs. A person in poverty may still feel fulfilled if they have strong social support. Others, who have never known material abundance, may not perceive a lack at all. Contentment often depends on personal perspective rather than external conditions. For example, someone who has faced hardship from an early age might still develop a deep sense of belonging, esteem, and even purpose. Another person, disconnected from social norms but filled with curiosity, might turn inward and find self-actualization through introspection. This shows that self-actualization is not a rigid process but a deeply personal journey. Once a person has experienced higher levels of fulfillment, they are more likely to return to that state even after setbacks. This is where practices like meditation and flow states, found in art, exercise, and creative pursuits, become valuable. They allow individuals to cultivate inner growth, even in challenging circumstances. Ultimately, while pleasure is woven into the journey of self-actualization, it is not about indulgence but about meaningful engagement with life. Self-actualization thrives not in the absence of pleasure, but in the pursuit of deeper fulfillment. The balance between restraint and fulfillment. So, where does that leave us? How do we integrate pleasure without letting it dictate our happiness? The answer lies in a few guiding principles. Intention over impulse. Engage with pleasure mindfully. Ask yourself, am I indulging in this because it truly enriches me, or am I seeking temporary escape? Quality over quantity. More is not always better. A single meaningful conversation can be more fulfilling than an evening of mindless entertainment. Pleasure as a byproduct, not a goal. Happiness often comes when we are immersed in meaningful action, rather than when we are fixated on achieving pleasure itself. The art of letting go. When we stop clinging to pleasure as our sole source of happiness, we free ourselves to experience deeper, more sustainable joy. Final reflection. What role does pleasure play in your life? At the heart of this paradox is a deeply personal journey. How we approach pleasure, whether as an addiction, an occasional indulgence, or a mindful companion, shapes our experience of happiness and self-actualization. So I leave you with this question. Is pleasure a distraction in your life or a tool for deeper fulfillment? The answer isn't universal. It's one you must explore for yourself through introspection, experience, and a willingness to redefine what happiness truly means. The key is not in abandoning pleasure, but in learning how to hold it lightly, allowing it to complement rather than consume our path to self actualization.